Good morning. I'm Ronnie Ziggy, and I'm delighted to be moderating this morning's Insight program. We welcome everyone, all races, all faith backgrounds, all ethnicities, all gender identities, orientations, expressions, all those who suffer disability, and all political perspectives who come in peace. We begin our program today with the Chalice Lighting. We call this light before us in hope that we may always remain a strong community working together to make the world a better place. When we are grieving or sad, when we are challenged, when we need help, this flame guides us out of the darkness. When we're cheerful, when we celebrate, when we accomplish a task, when we return to a place that makes us happy, the chalice reminds us to share our happiness with others. By Atticus Palmer. Now, please join me in our affirmation of covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church, and the quest of truth its sacrament, and service its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the good. Thus do we covenant with one another. Our tradition at UUVC is to be generous with time, talent, and treasures. So each week we take up a collection to show our commitment to ourselves and to the community at large. This month's Share the Plate recipient is Hope Works. Hope Works is a program that focuses on the homeless, both male and female, to provide job training, which will lead to meaningful work moving toward permanent job placement. For more information, more detailed information, watch Kim Townsend's interview with Janie Smith on the UUVC website. To make a contribution, send your check made out to UUVC to 403 Barcelona, Hot Springs Village, Arkansas, 71909, with share in the memo line. UUVC welcomes Dr. Earl Babbie to our Insight service today for a presentation on creating a new future. Babbie is best known for his book, The Practices of Social Research. In addition, Babbie has published numerous textbooks. He attended Harvard College on a Naval Research Officers Training Course scholarship and graduated with a BA in social relations. From 1960 to 63, Babbie served in the U.S. Marine Corps. He went on to complete graduate studies at the University of California, Berkeley, where he received both an MA and a PhD. Dr. Babbie taught sociology at the University of Hawaii and Chapman University in California. He's also a past president of the Pacific Sociological Association and California Sociological Association. Welcome, Dr. Babbie.
I've been asked to speak on the topic, a new future is being created. It's an interesting idea since a new future is always being created, but it's especially intriguing at a time marked and marred by the COVID pandemic, the resulting economic recession, and not to mention the January 6th invasion of the US Capitol building. We might ask two basic questions here. One, who's creating our future? And two, what will it look like? Well, in the first question, some people feel they have a strong hand in how their future turns out, and even how it turns out for others. Social activists would fit in that category. But at the same time, some people feel it's being done to them, that they have no control over how things will turn out. I suppose all of us have a bit of both views, with some variation as to the balance between the two. But as Abraham Lincoln said, the most reliable way to predict the future is to create it. So in the next few minutes, we'll lean in the direction of creating the future we want. I'd like to look at some of the things we might try to include in our new future. And this being Women's History Month, we'll pay special attention to possible changes in the life experiences of women. These days, in the age of the pandemic, we often hear people longing for a return to normalcy. That's unlikely to happen. Things will never be the same. But then that's true of every new future. Even in boring times, we experience some changes. We grow older, for example, as do our children, if any. But the extent of change will probably be more dramatic this time around. Some people long for a return to the familiarity of work or school, eating out, getting together with friends, going to concerts and sporting events. Our situation is not unique in these regards. I have no personal experience of the Great Depression, but I can imagine the people whose lives were turned upside down longed for a return to normalcy. How many of the farmers driven out of the Dust Bowl prayed for an eventual return to their family farms? Most didn't realize that dream. Their future did not include a return to normalcy. World War II upset the routines for many or most Americans. I was almost 4 when Pearl Harbor was attacked, so I avoided the draft. But there were changes in my young life. I vaguely recall meatless Thursdays, and I faithfully peeled the aluminum foil off my gum wrappers and added it to the ball I was creating for someone to use in building an airplane or a machine gun. Near the end of the war, when I was in school, each student in my class knitted a 4-inch square, and our teacher sewed them together to create a blanket for a boy overseas. World War II was obviously a bigger deal for many or most adults, and the end of the war raised questions about the future then dawning. Many social changes could not be reversed, at least not completely. You may remember the song, "How You Gonna Keep Them Down on the Farm After They've Seen Paris?" I'll spare you my singing that. The war actually produced a mass migration from the country to the city. Rosie the Riveter had discovered she could do men's work, and Truman's integration of the armed forces disrupted conventional race relations, to be followed later by the civil rights movement. Even though women and African Americans were not totally liberated, there would be no complete return to the normalcy of pre-war America. Today, we find ourselves at war with a very tiny enemy, much sneakier than our World War II foes. COVID-19 hasn't brought us to our knees, but it's certainly gotten our attention and disrupted life as normal. Especially interesting to this sociologist, it's revealed aspects of American life I didn't previously appreciate. Libertarian urges have popped up unexpectedly. People who presumably drive with their headlights on at night, would presumably wear a helmet in combat, seem to find wearing a mask to be an affront to their God-given American freedoms. A young woman carrying a sign saying, "My body, my choice," is not necessarily referring to abortion. The issue of mask wearing has provoked fistfights and even shootings. And the anti-vaccine movement, normally addressing measles, mumps, and the flu, has expanded to oppose COVID vaccinations. When Barbra Streisand sang about people who need people, I never realized what a serious matter that was. Restrictions on joining friends at the local tavern or at the ball game have proved a greater assault on our humanity than could have been imagined. At the same time, people work at home or schooled at home. How many of us had heard of Zoom before COVID checked into our lives? Overall, we've seen 2 major reactions to the limits on interpersonal socialization: whining and adapting. As we consider the creation of a new future, adaptation is more relevant. Working at home has proved a positive development for many. Employees enjoy not having to commute to work or dress up below the waist at Zoom meetings or when speaking to church groups in the village. Some corporations have discovered cost savings by not having to own or rent large office spaces, including the attendant utility costs. There seems to be a good chance that working at home will remain more common than in pre-pandemic times. Harvard's Steven Pinker said, "It would be a missed opportunity not to replace all those physical meetings we never enjoyed in the first place with quicker, cheaper, more carbon neutral alternatives." The notion of essential worker has been slowly evolving during the pandemic. I think it's fair to say that Amazon warehouse workers, grocery store clerks, and delivery service drivers have not enjoyed the highest status in our society. But many of us now see them as more essential than, say, hedge fund managers. Mail carriers, meat packers, hospital custodians seem more essential than oil and gas lobbyists. The importance of these essential workers is combined with the special risks they may face on the front lines of COVID avoidance. To the extent that some essential services employ a disproportionate number of minority members, race and ethnic relations will likely see some changes in the process, especially if nudged in that direction. The nature of work is only one aspect of the life ripe for change due to our experience of the pandemic. We could add to this category education, sports, shopping, dining, every other aspect of social life. When I speak of causing social change in our future, I don't just mean that you might organize a social movement supporting a particular change. Your behavior will be part of the impetus for change. Now, the attempted takeover of the US Capitol on January 6th has called out for a number of changes in our future. In part, it has drawn our attention to the extent of white supremacy in our society. We all knew it existed, but most of us probably underestimated its extent. Now, I don't think the previous presidential administration caused white supremacy, but it gave it legitimacy and supported it by saying there were some good people among those carrying Nazi and Confederate flags in Charlottesville. The supportive stance carried over to those invading the Capitol building in January, some patriotic citizens. Similarly, references to the China virus or Kung flu seem to have sparked an increase in the already existent anti-Asian prejudice and violence. I would suggest that the future we create needs to include an attention to white supremacy and efforts to eradicate it. This should go hand in hand with a renewed commitment to democracy, including the eradication of voter suppression activities, for example. And it's astounding to me that some state legislatures are passing legislation granting themselves the right to overturn presidential election results in their states. Well, the voters chose the Democratic candidate, but we're going to give the votes to the Republican. There will be plenty of work to be done to restore democracy in the nation that was its cradle in 1776. I suggest that our new future needs to include gender equity. This is, of course, a global issue, and much progress has been made in the decades and years leading up to the present, but that work is decidedly incomplete. Let me address one battlefield in the war for equity: the gender wage gap. In 2018, white women earned 79 cents for every dollar earned by a white man. The gap was worse for African American women, 62 cents. Hispanics or Latinos, 54 cents. And Native Americans earned 57 cents for every Native American man's dollar. Let me take a minute or two to explain away some phony explanations sometimes offered for these differences. Occupation may be cited as an explanation, for example. Doctors are more likely to be men, while nurses are more likely to be women. And since doctors earn more than nurses, that might seem to explain the gender difference in pay. But if you compare male and female doctors, the men earn more. Same with nurses. Or because of child rearing and related demands, women are likely to have fewer years of seniority than their male counterparts. Again, this can seem a reasonable explanation, but if you compare men and women with the same years of seniority, men are paid more. All of this was brought together in a 1985 University of Michigan study, which to my knowledge has never been repeated, but it should be. Nevertheless, the findings are worth noting. The researchers conducted a large-scale survey of the national labor force, which included data on earnings and all the factors that might legitimately affect the level of pay. The researchers separated the men and women in their analysis and further divided the men into two groups at random. In one of the male groups, they employed an analytic technique called multiple regression to generate a complex equation that would explain differences in earnings. The equation included some 20 variables: occupation, seniority, education, age, anything you might think of that could affect differences in pay. Once they created the equation explaining differences in earnings, they shifted gears to check how well it would predict. They applied the equation to the other group of men and predicted their earnings within an average of $30 a year. In other words, the equation seemed to be a powerful explanation for differences in pay. When they applied the same equation to women in their sample, however, they overestimated women's annual earnings by an average of $3,000. That's $3,1985. You might bear this in mind the next time someone rationalizes the gender pay gap. At present, there's a debate over raising the minimum wage to $15. It's worth noting that some 60% of minimum wage earners are women. Well, another example of gender inequity, often discussed, concerns political office holding. For example, the United States has never had a woman president. We elected one in 2016 by a margin of 3 million votes, but the Electoral College shows someone of a different gender. To be sure, women are denied participation in government around the world, but we also know that some countries are better than the USA in this regard. You can probably name some women who were elected president or prime minister of their countries. Margaret Thatcher and Indira Gandhi come readily to mind, and more recently, Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand. 4 years ago, I wondered how many other countries had elected female leaders. Please bear with me for a minute while I review what I found. Andorra, Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Australia, Austria, Bangladesh, Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Brazil, Bulgaria, Burundi, Canada, Central African Republic, Chile, China, Costa Rica, Croatia, Denmark, Dominica, Ecuador, Estonia, Finland, France, Gabon, Georgia, Germany, Greece, Grenada, Guinea-Bissau, Guyana, Haiti, Iceland, India, Indonesia, Ireland, Israel, Jamaica, Kosovo, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Liberia, Lithuania, Macedonia, Madagascar, Malawi, Mali, Malta, Marshall Islands, Mauritius, Moldova, Mozambique, Myanmar, Namibia, Nepal, New Zealand, Nicaragua, Northern Cyprus, Norway, Pakistan, Peru, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Rwanda, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, San Marino, Sao Tome and Principe, Senegal, Serbia, Singapore, Slovakia and Slovenia, South Africa, South Korea, Sri Lanka, which, by the way, previously named Ceylon, was the first country to elect a woman leader. Switzerland, Taiwan, Thailand, the Bahamas, Transkei, Transnistria, Trinidad and Tobago, Turkey, Ukraine, United Kingdom, Yugoslavia. All told, 90 countries had elected women as heads of state. That's nearly half the 193 members of the UN, and many did so more than once. I also looked at women serving in the national legislatures. Rwanda does best. 60% of the lower house are women, 39% of the upper house. Bolivia, 53% of the lower house and 47% of the upper house. Cuba, 49% of the single house of legislature. Well, as you can imagine, I went down the list looking for us, and I went down and down and down, and there it was. The USA was number 99, with 17% of the House and 21% of the Senate. Now, we beat out Kyrgyzstan, but we were beaten in this by Saudi Arabia. Clearly, there's work to be done, but that work is already underway in the USA. Women currently comprise 27% of the House and 24% of the Senate, modest improvements in both. Many political pundits credit women, especially African American women, with the election of Joe Biden as the 46th president. And never to be forgotten, Kamala Harris is vice president. In fact, in the presidential line of succession, numbers 1 and 2 are both women. So let's sum up some of the things we might want to include in our plan for the new future. I'd begin with gender equity of all kinds, same pay for same work, opportunity to enter any occupation and occupational level that a woman's qualified for, and full political participation. There's more work to be done, I know, but those issues seem key. Similarly, racial and ethnic equity. The discriminations against women and against racial and ethnic minorities are strikingly similar, and minority women often suffer the most. Creating racial and ethnic equity implicitly works against white supremacy in American life. Eliminating this racial scourge is at the same time preserving the most fundamental American ideals laid out in our founding documents. We must achieve a revitalized American democracy in our new future. Part of the financial inequities I've mentioned, by the way, are reflected in the American wealth gap. No one expects every American to have the same amount of wealth, but we are way farther from that than seems appropriate. For example, America's 3 richest billionaires have substantially more wealth than the poorest 165 million Americans. The richest 1% own half the stocks and mutual funds. The wealth gap has been growing, driving the poor deeper into poverty and destroying the middle class. This must change. Well, I think I've mapped out a few of the changes we might want to include in our near future, but you might be asking whether humans are really capable of bringing about such ambitious social change. It's worth reflecting on some examples, perhaps. I think of the refugees around the world, women carrying babies on their backs in search of safety, pure heroism. Less dramatically, consider the many thousands of volunteers fighting COVID in America, directing traffic at food banks or vaccination sites, for example. Susie and I were visited the other day by a neighbor who stood outside our door wearing a mask. She simply wanted to know if we were okay, if we needed anything. She said she was going door to door checking on everyone. Our high school senior grandson worked with classmates to collect food and distribute it to those in need. I'm always mindful of our heroic medical workers, often doing double shifts while risking their health and lives. This also reminds me that we humans are a mixed bag. I recall an early news story of medical workers leaving their shifts to discover their tires had been slashed. More recently, however, I read of medical workers leaving work in the midst of the February snowstorm to find that local high school students had scraped the snow off their cars. I think the good within us outscores the bad, though I know that's sometimes a difficult point to defend. I'll conclude with a quotation from the smartest man I ever had the pleasure of knowing, Buckminster Fuller, or Bucky as he preferred to be called. Bucky suggested that, quote, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete," end quote. I think an example of that was Truman's integration of the military. Rather than argue about the matter, he created an integrated military that actually worked just fine. Well, I am honored and pleased to make these comments to Unitarian Universalist Village Church members and their friends. You embody the good qualities I've discussed, and your goodness influences everyone you come in contact with. That recognition gives me added hope for creating our new future together. Thank you, and please stay safe.
Right here, right now, is all I ever want. All my yesterdays and my tomorrows are right here, right now. It's what I waited for. Now I can say this is the best day of my life. Right now, I wanna step back, take a moment, take a deep breath. I wanna take this in. Oh, right now, I wanna slow it down, stop the world from turning round, so this moment never ends. If my eyes could stop the time, I'd take a picture in my mind. Never let this feeling pass. And if my dreams could come to life and all my wishes realized, I would find a way to make this moment last. Right here, right now, is all I ever want. All my yesterdays and my tomorrows what I waited for. Now I can say this is the best day of my life. Oh, 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 if I could, I would reach out, try to hold back the hands of time, if only just for a while. Oh, if I could, I would bring down all the stars up in the sky to shine on this moment in time. If I could stop the hourglass, the grains of sand before they pass. No future and no past. And if my dreams could come to life and all my wishes realized, I would only wish to make this moment last. Right here, right now, is all I ever want. All my yesterdays and my tomorrows. All right here, right now, is what I waited for. Now I can say this is the best day of my life. Oh, 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 right here, right now, is all I ever want. All my yesterdays and my tomorrows.